The room was busy, full of people talking and laughing, moving from one side to the other. It was one of those afternoons when the sun streamed through the tall windows, making the wooden floors shine. In the corner of the room sat an old piano. Its black paint was chipped in places, and some of the keys looked slightly worn. No one really noticed it. People were too busy with their own conversations, their own schedules. The piano had been there for a long time, quietly waiting, almost forgotten. Among the crowd, a young girl walked slowly, holding a small bag. She was dressed simply, not in fancy clothes or anything that would draw attention. Her hair fell naturally over her shoulders, and her shoes made soft sounds against the polished floor. She didn't rush or try to push through the crowd. Instead, she seemed to move with a calm confidence that was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She had a quiet presence, the kind that could make someone pass by without even noticing her. People looked around the room, busy with their own thoughts. Some were talking loudly, trying to be heard over the chatter. Others were checking their phones, scrolling through messages, completely absorbed in their own worlds. Nobody looked at the girl in the corner. If anyone had even thought about her, it was only for a moment, before their attention drifted back to whatever they were doing. No one expected anything from her. In that busy room, she was invisible, like a small shadow at the edge of the crowd. She paused near the piano and looked at it carefully. The piano wasn't new, but it had character. It had been played many times, probably by people who knew its notes and keys well. Some of the edges were worn from years of use, and there was a faint shine where hands had rested again and again. To the girl, it wasn't just an old piano. It was a place where something could happen, a place that held a secret waiting to be discovered. But at that moment, nobody else saw it that way. To everyone else, it was just furniture, just an old instrument that had seen better days. She moved closer and placed her hands lightly on the edge of the keys. Her fingers hovered above them, almost as if she was thinking, almost as if she was talking to the piano in her own quiet way. She didn't make any sudden movements. She didn't call attention to herself. She just stood there, breathing slowly, listening to the faint sounds of the room. The laughter, the footsteps, the murmurs, they all blended together, a soft background noise that she could ignore if she wanted. But she didn't ignore it completely. She let it fill the room around her, letting it flow around her like a river. While she focused on the piano, people noticed her only briefly. A few glanced in her direction and shrugged, thinking she was just another guest, another person wandering around with nothing special to do. Some whispered to each other quietly, making small jokes. "Do you think she can even play?" one person said. "She looks so small, like she doesn't know anything about music." The comments weren't mean-spirited, at least not completely. They were more like guesses, assumptions that came from years of seeing people perform or fail to perform. Nobody expected much. Not from her. The girl heard none of this, or if she did, she didn't let it matter. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere quiet. She was thinking about the music inside her head, the notes she wanted to play, the sounds she wanted to make. It wasn't about impressing anyone. She didn't want applause. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to let the music out. The piano was her way of doing that. It was a bridge between her thoughts and the outside world. A way for something hidden to become real. She sat down on the old bench, and it creaked softly under her weight. The sound seemed to echo for a moment in the room, catching a few eyes. But still, nobody was paying much attention. People were too busy, too focused on their own conversations. A server walked by with a tray of drinks, not noticing her. A group of friends laughed loudly nearby, talking over each other. The girl didn't flinch. She wasn't nervous in the way most people would be if they were about to perform in front of strangers. Instead, there was a calm determination in her. It was quiet, but it was strong. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. Her fingers moved slowly at first, testing the keys, finding the sound that each one made. There was a faint smile on her face, almost imperceptible, as if she had found something private that no one else could see. She leaned slightly forward, concentrating, and the world around her seemed to fade a little. The chatter, the footsteps, the laughter, they all became distant. In that moment, it was just her and the piano. The room stayed busy, but a few people started to notice something different. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a small shift. The girl's focus, the way she moved her hands carefully over the keys, started to catch attention. People glanced over without realizing why. Something about her presence seemed to quietly demand a little notice. Maybe it was the seriousness in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she carried herself. Whatever it was, slowly, little by little, people began to look. She didn't say a word. She didn't ask anyone to watch. She didn't even look up. But there was something in the air, something subtle that made people pause for a moment. The energy around the piano was changing, though nobody could quite put their finger on why. It wasn't music yet, not really. Just the anticipation of it, a sense that something was about to happen. And in a crowded, busy room full of distractions, that sense alone was unusual. A server walking past stopped for a second, tilting their head slightly as if noticing something they hadn't before. A couple of friends who had been talking quietly looked over and shared a small, surprised glance. "Did you see her?" One whispered. "She looks like she knows what she's doing." The words were soft, almost shy, as if admitting it made them feel slightly guilty for doubting her before. But the girl didn't hear them. She didn't need to. Her focus was on the piano, on the keys, on the feeling of the music waiting inside her. Time seemed to stretch. The sunlight from the windows touched the piano and her hands, making them glow slightly. The room around her seemed to slow, though people were still moving and talking. It was as if the piano had created a small bubble, a quiet space where she could exist without the chaos of the room. Nobody could predict what would happen next. Nobody expected anything. And maybe that was exactly how it was meant to be. The girl took a deep breath and relaxed her shoulders. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment longer, as if saying hello to an old friend. And then quietly, almost too soft for anyone to notice, she pressed a key. The sound was delicate, almost like a whisper. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need to be. But even in that small, quiet note, there was a hint of something different. Something that had been hidden for a long time, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. People glanced over again. Some barely noticed. Some thought it was just the piano itself, maybe a key being pressed by accident. But a few looked more closely. There was a sense in her playing that was hard to describe. It wasn't music yet, not fully, but it was the beginning. The very first note. And in that note there was a promise. The girl smiled faintly, almost to herself, and prepared for what was coming next. She didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to prove herself. The piano was her voice, and soon it would speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. But not yet. For now, the room remained busy, unaware, and she remained quietly in the corner, ready to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. And that was how part one ended, not with applause, not with recognition, but with quiet anticipation. A girl no one noticed, an old piano, and the first hint of something remarkable about to happen. The moment she touched the piano keys, a subtle shift began to happen in the room. Most people didn't notice it at first. They were still laughing, talking, moving around, caught up in their own little worlds. But a few eyes wandered toward her. Some were curious, some confused, and some almost dismissive. After all, she was just a small, quiet girl in the corner. Nobody expected anything remarkable from her. That was exactly why the tension in the air felt heavier than usual. A group of friends sitting near the back of the room nudged each other and whispered quietly, "Do you think she actually knows how to play?" One asked, raising an eyebrow. "She looks tiny. Like she couldn't possibly manage those keys," said another. The words weren't meant to be cruel, but they carried the weight of doubt. The laughter was low, almost casual, but it made the girl's presence feel lighter, as though she was invisible. She seemed so ordinary, so unassuming, that the idea of her being able to play at all seemed almost impossible to the onlookers, even the older people in the room. The ones who had been around long enough to see many performances and hear many excuses didn't look twice. They were polite, nodding politely, glancing in her direction without really paying attention. Some leaned back in their chairs, sipping their drinks, thinking that if she did play, it wouldn't matter much. The piano had been touched by many before her, and most of them had been ordinary, average, or even clumsy. What made anyone think she could be different? Then came the jokes. Not loud or cruel, just the kind of jokes people make when they don't expect anything serious. Should we bet on how long she lasts before giving up? Someone murmured under their breath. A few people chuckled softly, glancing toward her for confirmation that their guess was right. Another whispered, "Maybe she just wants to make us feel sorry for her if she messes up." The humor in their words carried an assumption. She was small, quiet, inexperienced, and clearly didn't belong in the spotlight. The doubt in the room was thick, almost tangible, and it weighed heavily on the atmosphere. The girl, however, seemed to notice none of it. She didn't frown. She didn't tighten her shoulders. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She simply adjusted herself slightly on the piano bench and breathed slowly, as if grounding herself before something important. There was no panic in her eyes, no hesitation in her movements. She was fully aware of the world around her, yet she chose to let it fade into the background. Every whisper, every chuckle, every doubtful glance became part of the invisible wall she built between herself and the expectations of the crowd. It was in that silence that her first true challenge began. She had to focus, to prepare, to transform the invisible energy of doubt into something tangible. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, feeling their texture under her fingertips. The piano was old, and some keys were slightly sticky, some felt rougher than others, but she didn't hesitate. She knew each key had its own character, and she welcomed the challenge. Every minor imperfection was just another note in the song she was about to create. The people closest to her started noticing something different. One of the servers, passing by with a tray of drinks, paused mid-step. His eyes flicked toward her, narrowing slightly as he tried to understand what he was seeing. A small group near the windows turned their heads almost at the same moment, their chatter slowing down as curiosity took over. There was a subtle tension growing in the room, one that nobody could put into words, but everyone felt it. Something unusual was about to happen, and even those who didn't care yet sensed it. Still, the group whispering jokes didn't stop. "She's just pretending," one said under his breath, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "She probably doesn't even know a single song." His friend snorted softly, shaking his head. They weren't being mean, they just didn't believe in her. Nobody in the room could imagine that someone so quiet, so unassuming, could suddenly command attention. And in a way, that made the moment even more perfect, because she didn't need anyone to believe in her. She only needed the piano and the courage to start. Her hands hovered above the keys for a few seconds longer. She closed her eyes lightly, not to block the room, but to block her own nerves, if she had any. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, feeling the skepticism around her, and she let it settle into determination instead of fear. It was almost like she was gathering all the doubts in the room and turning them into fuel. Every whisper, every skeptical glance, every tiny laugh became a note in the music she hadn't yet played. Then, slowly, she pressed a key. Just one. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce her presence with a flourish. It was simple, soft, and deliberate. The sound rang clearly in the corner of the room, just enough for a few people nearby to notice. Some glanced at her and shrugged, thinking it might have been an accident. Others leaned slightly forward, curiosity flickering in their eyes. But most people, the majority, didn't notice at all. They were still talking, still laughing, still absorbed in their own world. She pressed another key and then another. The notes were soft, hesitant, but there was a clear sense of purpose behind them. They weren't random. They weren't clumsy. They weren't mistakes. They were the first whispers of something much bigger. Her fingers moved with a quiet confidence. And even in those earliest, simplest notes, there was a hint of emotion, a hint of control. A hint that she had something no one else had expected. By now, a few more people had started to notice. One young woman in the back leaned against a pillar, her cup of coffee forgotten in her hand. She watched quietly, trying not to make it obvious, but unable to pull her eyes away. A man near the front, adjusting his jacket, stopped mid-step and tilted his head, curiosity overcoming his initial doubt. The whispers from the skeptics began to die down slightly, replaced by quiet questions. Is she really going to play? Someone muttered. She's small, but maybe she can? There was a flicker of doubt in their doubt, an unintentional recognition that something unusual was happening. The girl didn't notice the shifting attention. She didn't need to. She was focused entirely on her connection with the piano. Every key responded to her touch as if it had been waiting for her hands all along. She pressed the keys with gentle strength, letting the sound flow naturally. The music was still simple, but it carried emotion. It carried presence. It carried the quiet power of someone who had practiced in secret, someone who had waited for the right moment to let the world hear her. Few people in the room began to stop what they were doing. Phones lowered, conversations paused, eyes turned toward the corner. The energy in the room was changing imperceptibly. The laughter faded into quiet curiosity. The whispers of jokes became still, replaced by a growing tension. Something remarkable was happening. Even though nobody yet understood the magnitude of it, the skeptics closest to her began to feel it too. One of them muttered, almost unconsciously, She might actually know how to play. The words were hesitant, full of surprise, almost as if admitting it would make their own assumptions feel foolish. But the music wasn't even fully there yet. They were sensing only the promise, the potential, the calm confidence in the way she touched the keys. And that was enough to start breaking down the walls of doubt they had built so quickly in their minds. She continued pressing keys. Now, with more intention, letting the first simple notes grow into something that had rhythm, something that had life. The piano responded to her completely. Every key, every note, every sound seemed to bend perfectly to her will. She didn't rush. She didn't show off. She simply let the music come out, letting it speak for her before she even needed to dot, and slowly, very slowly, the room began to shift. People stopped talking. People stopped moving. People who had been joking, doubting, and whispering quietly now looked, fully aware that something extraordinary was beginning. They didn't yet know how far it would go or how perfect it would become. But in that moment, even before the real music had begun, they realized that their expectations were wrong. They hadn't expected anything from her. They didn't expect much at all. And now they couldn't take their eyes off her. The girl didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge the room. She didn't need to. Her music, even in its earliest stages, was saying everything she wanted it to. And in that quiet, unnoticed corner of a busy room, she was slowly, gently, but undeniably, starting to reveal that she was nothing like anyone had assumed. The first part of her performance, the quiet testing, the soft notes, the hesitation mixed with control was over. It had been short, almost imperceptible, and yet it had changed something. The room had shifted. The doubt in people's minds had been challenged. The joke whispers had paused. And the girl, quietly sitting at the piano, had begun her journey from being invisible to being noticed. The crowd didn't yet know what was coming. They didn't yet know how extraordinary she truly was. But the first seeds had been planted. And when she was ready, those seeds would grow into something unforgettable. The moment had finally come. After the quiet testing of the keys, the soft notes, and the small hints of skill, she was ready to let the music flow freely. The room, once noisy and full of distractions, had started to fall into a hush. People were no longer talking or laughing. Phones were lowered. Eyes that had wandered aimlessly were now fixed on her. The atmosphere had changed. It was as if the air itself had paused, waiting to see what would happen next. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs and settle her mind. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a brief moment, as if listening to the piano, as if feeling its response before making a single sound. And then she began. The first notes were slow, deliberate, full of emotion. They carried a gentle sadness, a hint of longing that made the room feel suddenly smaller, more intimate even though it was still crowded. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward slightly, trying to catch every sound. It wasn't just that she played well. It was something deeper. Every note seemed to tell a story, to speak a language that went beyond words. The skeptics who had been joking just moments ago felt a strange pull, a mix of surprise and awe. Some leaned back in disbelief, others whispered quietly to their neighbors. "Did you hear that?" One said, She's amazing." The words came out in a half-whisper, almost like they couldn't fully believe what their ears were hearing. Her hands moved with grace and precision. They glided over the keys, pressing them with strength and gentleness at the same time. She didn't rush, but she didn't hesitate either. Every movement was intentional, every note perfectly placed. The music rose and fell, soft and loud, gentle and strong, in a way that made the listeners' hearts beat a little faster. The room, once chaotic, was now silent except for the sound of the piano. It was as if she had created her own world, a world where only the music existed and everything else had disappeared. Some of the people who had doubted her earlier couldn't hide their surprise. Their mouths fell open slightly, their eyes widening. One young man muttered under his breath, "I didn't think she could do this." His friend nodded silently, unable to speak, simply staring in amazement. Even the ones who had made jokes now felt foolish. The laughter and whispers had disappeared, replaced by a quiet reverence. For the first time, they weren't judging her. They were listening, and they were captivated. The music grew stronger, more confident. She began to play faster, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys. Complex patterns emerged, notes intertwining like threads in a tapestry. Every note was clear, every rhythm precise. It was not just skill, it was passion, dedication, and an understanding of the piano that went beyond what most people could imagine. The energy in the room shifted again, this time in a way that made the hair on the back of some listeners' necks stand on end. There was power in her playing, a presence that couldn't be ignored. Some people instinctively reached for their phones, but even then, their eyes never left her. They wanted to capture the moment, but they also knew that no recording could truly do justice to what they were hearing. Each note, each pause, each gentle press of the key carried emotion that could only be felt in person. And as the music continued, more people stopped talking, more people turned to watch. And more people realized that what they had dismissed as a quiet, unassuming girl was actually something extraordinary. The piano seemed to respond to her touch in a way that was almost magical. The sound was rich and full, filling the room with a warmth that made people forget where they were for a moment. A few of the older guests, who had seen countless performances over the years, leaned forward in disbelief. They had seen talented musicians before, but something about her playing was different. There was emotion in every note, a story being told without words, a genius that had been hidden until this very moment. Even the skeptics couldn't stop themselves from being drawn in. The young man who had whispered, "I didn't think she could do this," now sat completely still, his eyes wide. His friend, who had shrugged in doubt, now leaned closer, almost afraid to blink and miss something. Every note challenged their assumptions, every chord showed them that their expectations had been completely wrong. They had thought she couldn't play, that she would fail, that she was just another quiet girl in the corner. Now they knew they had been completely mistaken. She didn't look around at the audience. She didn't smile or make a gesture. Her focus remained on the piano, on the music, on the story she wanted to tell. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about letting the music speak, about expressing something that words could never capture. And as she played, the room seemed to lean into her performance. People shifted slightly, adjusting their posture, leaning forward, listening with full attention. Even the air felt different, charged with a quiet excitement that could be felt but not described. The melody began to change, moving from soft and gentle to bold and powerful. Her fingers moved faster now, with confidence and precision that made it seem effortless. She played with both technical skill and deep emotion. The music soared, filling every corner of the room. Some listeners' hearts raced as they felt the energy of the performance. Others closed their eyes for a moment, letting themselves be carried away by the sound. The girl, once unnoticed, had become the center of the room, the source of an energy that nobody had expected. A few people in the crowd began to whisper again, but this time it wasn't mockery or doubt. It was amazement. "She's incredible," one said quietly. "I've never heard anything like this." Another shook their head, unable to believe what they were hearing. Even those who had been skeptical moments ago now watched with admiration and awe. The quiet girl in the corner had revealed a hidden talent that no one could have predicted. The music reached a climax, a combination of speed, skill, and emotion that left everyone listening on edge. Her fingers flew over the keys, pressing them with exact timing, creating a harmony that was both complex and beautiful. People held their breath, afraid to blink and miss a single moment. The piano, once just a piece of furniture in the corner, now sang under her hands. It had become alive, as if it had been waiting for someone like her all along. Some listeners began to feel a deep emotional connection to what they were hearing. There was joy in the melody, sadness in the chords, and hope in every rising note. The music told a story that nobody in the room could fully describe, but everyone could feel. It was as if she had taken the doubts and jokes, the casual whispers and assumptions, and turned them into something beautiful. Every note was a triumph, every chord a declaration. She was not ordinary. She was extraordinary. When she played the final notes, the room seemed to hold its breath for a moment longer than usual. The music didn't just fade, it lingered, echoing in the minds of the listeners. Some opened their eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. Others stayed still, staring at her with wide eyes, unsure how to respond. The silence was not awkward. It was reverent. It was the kind of silence that comes when something remarkable has just happened. When people realize they have witnessed something they will remember forever. Finally, the sound faded completely. The room was silent, but it was a silence filled with awe, respect, and wonder. People began to clap slowly, almost tentatively at first. Then, one by one, the clapping grew louder, stronger, more enthusiastic. The quiet girl, who had been overlooked and doubted, had completely captivated the room. Every hand in the room rose in applause, every eye fixed on her. Every person in the crowd realizing that they had underestimated her. She remained seated for a moment, taking it all in quietly. She didn't need to smile or bow. Her music had spoken for her. It had told a story that words could never capture. And as the applause continued, growing louder, the room slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, but now they were full of excitement and admiration. People were talking about what they had just heard, shaking their heads in disbelief, replaying the music in their minds. The girl had started as someone invisible in a busy room. She had faced doubt, jokes, and low expectations. And now, after only a few minutes at the piano, she had revealed her true talent. She had shown that first impressions could be wrong, that quiet people could have immense power, and that genius often hides where no one expects to find it. For the first time, the audience realized that their assumptions had been shattered. The girl no one noticed, the one they had doubted and whispered about, had proven herself in a way that nobody could ignore. And in that moment, she became unforgettable. The room was alive with a new energy. People had been amazed by her first few notes, but now, as her fingers moved over the piano keys with increasing confidence, the effect was almost electric. The once quiet and skeptical crowd was now fully focused on her, their eyes fixed, their breaths held. Every note she played seemed to capture more attention, more emotion, more fascination. The room had shifted completely. She was no longer just a quiet girl in the corner. She had become the center of everyone's attention, commanding it effortlessly through her music. Her playing grew stronger, richer, more expressive. The notes flowed like a river, smooth and continuous, carrying the emotion that words could never express. There was passion in the rise and fall of each chord, in the gentle softness of the melody, and in the sudden bursts of strength that seemed to shake the air around her. The music had a story, a deep story that everyone in the room could feel, even if they couldn't understand it fully. Some felt joy, some felt longing, some felt a quiet sadness, but all felt moved. People who had been joking or whispering doubts were now silent. unable to speak, unable to interrupt the flow. One person, a man who had leaned back in his chair with a skeptical smirk moments ago, now sat forward, eyes wide, gripping the edge of his seat as if holding on to the music itself. He couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop listening. Each note told him something he had never expected. That talent could appear where it seemed least likely. That genius could hide in the quietest corners. She didn't pause. She didn't look up. She didn't seek approval. Her focus was complete, absolute, and mesmerizing. Her fingers flew over the keys, effortlessly moving between soft, tender passages and strong, commanding chords. The music became a dance, a conversation, a story being told in real time. Every person in the room could feel it. Some had tears forming in their eyes, not because the music was sad, but because it was so beautifully alive, so full of life and feeling that it moved them in ways they didn't expect. The people who had doubted her earlier now whispered to each other, but their words were filled with awe. "I didn't know she could do that," one said softly. "I thought she was just quiet, just shy." Another shook their head, trying to find the right words. "It's like, she's telling a story without saying anything. It's incredible." Even those who had been indifferent, walking past her just minutes ago, had stopped and now stood rooted to the floor. Watching her fingers move with precision and grace, her music filled every corner of the room. The old piano, once just a piece of furniture in the corner, had come alive under her hands. Each note resonated with clarity, each chord carried emotion, and every pause added meaning. The piano seemed to have been waiting for her, waiting for someone who could bring out its voice so perfectly. People could see it now, the transformation from a simple, unnoticed instrument into a living, breathing part of her music. The crowd began to lean in, silently encouraging her without saying a word. Some held their hands near their hearts, feeling the rhythm in their chests. Some closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried away by the sound. A few people even whispered prayers or expressions of awe under their breath, not out of religion, but out of the pure, overwhelming beauty of what they were hearing. The room was no longer a room, it was a space filled with music, filled with emotion, filled with an energy that only someone with real talent could create. Her fingers moved faster now, but still with complete control. Complex patterns emerged, notes intertwining perfectly, chords rising and falling with natural rhythm. It was as if she and the piano were having a conversation, and the room had become part of that dialogue. People could feel the tension in the music, the release, the joy, the hope, the longing. Each emotion was clear, raw, and honest. Nobody had expected this. Nobody had imagined that she could play like this. And yet, here she was, proving that all assumptions had been wrong. Some people couldn't help but take out their phones, recording her. But even the best recording could not capture the full magic of the moment, the emotion. The intensity, the feeling that came from seeing her fingers move, watching her focus, hearing every note fill the room. The music was alive in a way that only existed in real life, only existed because she had brought it to life. People didn't just watch, they felt it. They were part of it, even if they didn't know how to describe it. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She didn't look for recognition. Her eyes stayed focused on the keys, her body relaxed yet full of energy, her mind completely immersed in the story she was telling through her music. She had long prepared for this, practiced in secret, learned the intricacies of the piano without anyone noticing. And now, all of it came together perfectly. Every movement, every chord, every note was intentional, powerful, and moving. The audience felt the transformation. They realized that their doubt had been misplaced, their assumptions incorrect. They had expected nothing. They had expected a quiet, timid performance, maybe even mistakes. Instead, they were witnessing genius. They were seeing someone who had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed reveal talent that left them speechless. The girl in the corner, once invisible, had now captured the hearts of everyone in the room. A few people even began to clap quietly, unsure if they should interrupt the flow of her performance, but unable to contain their admiration. It started slowly, soft, but gradually others joined. The clapping didn't stop the music, it enhanced it, feeding her energy, giving her courage, and letting the audience become part of the performance itself. People who had been skeptical moments ago now realized that this was not just skill, it was emotion. It was heart, it was soul poured out through music. Her performance reached a point of quiet intensity. The loud, dramatic notes had given way to soft, delicate passages, almost like whispers. She played with subtlety now, letting each note breathe, letting the silence between them speak. The room leaned in, every listener holding their breath, feeling every vibration, every emotion, every tiny nuance. It was in these soft moments that the real genius of her playing was revealed, the ability to communicate, something deeply personal and moving without words. Without flashy gestures, without exaggeration. Some listeners had tears forming in their eyes now. It wasn't sadness, it was wonder. It was the recognition of pure talent, of beauty so unexpected and so real that it moved them to a place they had never felt before. The girl who had been ignored, laughed at, underestimated, now had the power to make strangers feel deeply with just her hands and her piano. And she did it effortlessly, naturally, as if she had been born for this moment. The music swelled again, gradually rising to a gentle crescendo. Strong yet controlled, passionate yet measured. Her fingers danced across the keys, precise yet full of emotion. The piano seemed to sing under her touch, bringing out sounds that nobody thought were possible. People's eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open, hearts beating faster with every chord. The room, which had been full of noise and distraction, was now silent except for the music. She had transformed the space completely. Even the skeptics, the ones who had made jokes, were no longer laughing. They were leaning forward now, completely captivated. Some whispered softly to each other, "I didn't think it would be like this. She's unbelievable. How is she doing that?" There were no answers. There was only admiration, awe, and the realization that this girl, who nobody expected anything from, had become the most important person in the room through the power of her music. As the final passage approached, her playing became more expressive. She used every bit of her skill and emotion, letting the notes rise and fall like waves, carrying the audience with her. People's faces reflected the music, some smiling, some looking thoughtful, some with tears glimmering. It was impossible to look away. The quiet girl, who had been ignored, had become unforgettable. Every note she played was a testament to her talent, her dedication, and her courage to play despite the doubts around her. And when the final note faded, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat, as if nobody could believe it had ended. Then slowly applause began. One person clapped, then another, and soon the entire room erupted into cheers. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The energy was incredible. The quiet girl had not just played the piano, she had transformed the room, changed the expectations of everyone, and revealed a hidden genius that nobody had predicted. Her fingers rested gently on the last key. She didn't look up immediately. She simply let the applause wash over her, quietly absorbing it, still humble, still focused, still herself. The crowd, once skeptical and doubtful, now looked at her with admiration, respect, and amazement. They had witnessed something rare, something magical. And they knew that this moment, this performance, would stay in their memories for a long time.